You know that feeling. You're alone. Completely alone. No one in the room. No sound. And yet, it doesn't feel like it, like something is aware of you. Not in a horror movie way. In a moral way. Like your thoughts are being noticed. Judged. Even. Here's the contradiction. Religious people say they believe in love, comfort, guidance. So why does it sometimes feel like surveillance? And the strange part? Even people who stop believing still feel it. So what is this feeling, really? And why is it so hard to turn off? It starts before you even know it. No one remembers the moment it begins, and that is exactly why it works so well. It slips in quietly, long before you develop the ability to question it. Usually, it starts when you are a child, sitting somewhere small and safe, listening to someone you trust. A parent, a teacher, maybe a kind voice at the front of a room. The message sounds simple, almost gentle. God sees everything. Nothing is hidden. He knows your heart. At first, it feels comforting in a very real way. Children are wired to seek protection, and this idea offers an invisible form of it. Someone is always there. Someone who never sleeps, never leaves, never forgets about you. It feels like having a parent who stays even after the lights go out. For a child, that can feel like the best deal in the world. But here is where the shift begins, and it is so subtle most people never notice it happening. The same presence that protects you also observes you, not just your actions but your thoughts. Not just what you do, but what you almost do. You hear that lying is seen, that bad thoughts are known, that even feelings you keep hidden still count. And suddenly, privacy starts to shrink. A child learns quickly. You begin to monitor yourself, even when no one else is around. You pause before saying something, not because someone in the room might react, but because something unseen might already know. It becomes less about behavior and more about internal control. Your mind starts developing a quiet second layer, one that watches the first. Over time, awareness changes its role. It is no longer just a comforting presence in the background. It becomes an observer that follows you into your thoughts. You are not just living anymore. You are living while being evaluated, and the evaluation never fully turns off. The brain doesn't know it's imaginary. Your brain treats attention as real, even when it is not coming from anything physical. It does not pause to ask whether someone is actually there. It responds to the feeling of being observed, as if it were happening in front of your eyes. There is a well-known pattern in human behavior called the observer effect. When people believe they are being watched, something changes immediately. Posture shifts. Words become more measured. Actions slow down. Even small decisions start passing through an extra filter. People become more controlled, more careful, sometimes more anxious, without fully understanding why. Now, here is where it becomes important. The brain does not need a real pair of eyes to trigger that response. The belief alone is enough. If a person grows up with the idea that an invisible observer is always present, always aware, always paying attention, the brain adapts to that condition as if it were permanent. It builds habits around it. The nervous system does not separate physical presence from imagined presence very well. It reacts to both in similar ways. Heart rate, tension, alertness, all of it can shift based on perception alone. That is why people feel nervous speaking on a stage even before anyone reacts. The mind fills in the audience before anything happens. Now, extend that idea further. If the observer is believed to be constant, then the response becomes constant too. The brain never receives a clear signal that says it is safe to relax completely. There is always a low-level awareness running in the background, like a light that never turns off. Over time, this stops feeling unusual. It becomes normal to filter thoughts before they fully form, normal to correct yourself mid-sentence, even in your own head, normal to feel like something is noticing, even in silence. It is like having a security camera installed inside your thoughts, not one you chose, but one that has always been there. And because it was never switched on in a visible way, you also never learned how to switch it off. It's not just belief, it's identity. This is where it gets deeper, and a bit uncomfortable if you look at it honestly. For many people, this feeling is no longer just about religion. It is not something you turn on during prayer and turn off when you leave the room. It becomes part of who you are. Because, over time, the watcher does not stay outside of you. It moves in. At first, the idea is simple. God is watching me. That feels external, almost like someone standing behind you. But repetition does something powerful. The brain starts copying that role. It learns the pattern of observation and begins to recreate it from the inside. So the sentence changes without you noticing. It shifts from God is watching me to I should be watching myself. That is a completely different system. Now the responsibility is no longer outside, it is internalized. You start scanning your own thoughts before they fully form. You interrupt yourself mid-idea. You adjust your reactions before they reach the surface. Not because someone else reacted, but because you predicted the reaction in advance. That voice in your head becomes sharper over time. The one that steps in and says, "That is not right." The one that pulls you back when you get too close to a line you were taught not to cross. The one that adds a quiet pressure to stay within certain boundaries, even when no one is around to enforce them. And here is the strange part. It feels like you. It uses your voice, your language, your timing. But its structure was built through repetition. It was trained by years of hearing what is acceptable and what is not, what is seen and what is judged. It is learned surveillance. Installed early, repeated often, reinforced through emotion, and now it runs automatically. Like a background process that never closes. You can ignore it for a while, but it is still there, quietly shaping how you think, how you react, and sometimes even what you allow yourself to feel. Guilt is the glue that keeps it alive. Here is something most people do not notice until they slow down and really look at the pattern. The feeling of being watched is not constant in intensity. It rises and falls, and it follows a very specific trigger. It becomes strongest when you feel guilty. Not when you are relaxed, not when you are at peace, enjoying a quiet moment or doing something harmless. In those moments, the sense of observation fades into the background, almost like it was never there. But the moment you think you have crossed a line, even a small one, everything changes. It does not have to be a big action. Sometimes it is just a thought that feels slightly out of place. A desire you were told is not acceptable. A doubt that you were never supposed to entertain. Something subtle, almost invisible from the outside, but very clear on the inside. And suddenly, the presence feels closer, sharper, more focused. Almost like a spotlight turning directly toward you. Why does that happen? Because guilt activates the system. Guilt is not just an emotion. It is a signal. It tells your brain that something needs attention, something needs correction, something needs to be monitored more closely. It is like pressing a button that says, "Pay attention to me, I did something wrong." And your mind responds immediately. It increases awareness. It tightens control. It brings the sense of observation back to the front. Not because someone actually started watching in that moment, but because your brain believes this is exactly when observation is needed the most. In a strange way, the feeling is self-generated. The more guilt you feel, the more watched you feel. And the more watched you feel, the more carefully you monitor yourself. It becomes a loop that feeds itself, quietly reinforcing the idea that something out there must be paying attention. But in reality, the system is running from within. Doubt doesn't remove it. You would expect that once someone stops believing, the feeling would quietly fade away, that it would switch off like a light in an empty room. It does not. In some cases, it becomes even stronger, and that surprises people. They think leaving the belief system should bring relief, more space, more calm. Instead, they feel tension they did not have before. Because now there is conflict. One part of the mind has updated. It says this is not real. It questions the old ideas, breaks them apart, looks at them logically. That part feels clear, almost confident. But another part does not move as quickly. It lingers. And it asks a very simple question that carries a lot of weight. But what if it is? That small question is enough to keep everything running. It does not need certainty. It only needs possibility. Even a tiny opening is enough for the old pattern to stay active. The brain does not like unresolved risk. It would rather keep a system running than shut it down too early and regret it later. So it holds on, just in case. That is why the feeling of being watched does not disappear with belief. It is tied to uncertainty as much as it is to faith. It is like quitting a job, but still checking your email every morning. You know you do not work there anymore. You told yourself you are done. Maybe you even feel better most of the day. But something in you has not fully accepted it. So you check. Just in case something important comes in, just in case you missed something, just in case there are consequences you have not considered. And that habit keeps the connection alive. In the same way, doubt does not erase the feeling. It often stretches it, holding it in place between two positions, never fully on, never fully off. The fear of being wrong is powerful. Let's be honest for a moment, because this is where things stop being abstract. This is not just about feeling watched. That is only the surface. Underneath it, there is something heavier. The fear of being wrong, and not just a small mistake you can laugh off later. A serious kind of wrong. The kind that, according to many religious systems, carries consequences that do not end. Not temporary consequences, eternal ones. That idea leaves a mark. So, even if someone walks away from belief on a logical level, something emotional stays behind. Logic can move fast, but emotion moves carefully. It double-checks. It hesitates. It asks questions that are hard to silence. What if I misunderstood everything? What if I dismissed something important too quickly? What if I am making a mistake I cannot undo? These questions do not need clear answers to have power. They only need to exist. And once they are there, they create a quiet pressure in the background. Just in case. And just like that, the feeling of being watched returns, not in the same way as before. It is no longer comforting or reassuring. It becomes something else. It becomes a form of insurance. A way of staying alert, just enough to avoid potential risk. The mind keeps a small part of the system active, just in case those fears turn out to be true. Not because it is convinced, but because it is not completely certain either. And uncertainty is enough. In that state, being observed feels safer than being completely alone. Because if someone is watching, then maybe you are still within the system. Maybe you have not fully stepped outside of it. And that feels less dangerous than the alternative. So the mind makes a quiet decision. Better to feel observed than risk being unprepared. Humans are built to sense agency. There is another layer most people miss, and it has nothing to do with belief at first. It has to do with how the human brain is built. Humans are wired to detect presence, not carefully, not logically, but quickly, even when there is nothing there. It is an old survival system. For most of human history, missing a real threat was dangerous. Assuming something was there when it was not, that was usually harmless, so the brain learned to lean in one direction. Better to overdetect than underdetect. A small sound in the bushes, a shadow that moves slightly, a shift in the environment. The brain does not calmly analyze all possibilities. It jumps to a conclusion that keeps you alert. Something moved. That reaction happens fast, before logic even has time to catch up. It is automatic, efficient, and a little paranoid by design. Now, take that same system and place it inside a religious framework. You are told there is an invisible being, always present, always aware, not limited by space or time, not something you can see or measure. For the brain, this is a perfect match. It does not question it deeply at first. It does not need proof in the way adults think about proof. It simply adapts to the idea and integrates it into its pattern of detecting presence. And once it adapts, it continues doing what it was designed to do. It keeps scanning. Even in silence, even in stillness, even when there is no external signal at all, the system keeps running because it was never meant to turn off completely. That is why empty rooms do not always feel empty. Not because something is actually there, but because your brain is still doing its job. It is checking, sensing, staying aware, just in case. The quiet truth most people never say. Here is the part people rarely say out loud, even to themselves. It is not always resistance that keeps this feeling alive. Sometimes, it is attachment. Because the feeling of being watched is not only uncomfortable, in a strange way, it can also feel reassuring. Being observed can feel like being protected, like someone is keeping track when life feels chaotic, like there is a record of what you do, what you try, what you endure, that nothing is lost or ignored. And that does something subtle to the mind. It gives weight to your actions, even the small ones, even the ones no one else sees, a quiet thought, a private struggle, a decision you never explain to anyone. If someone is watching, then it all matters, it all counts for something. Take that away, and a different reality shows up. Total privacy. Not the kind people talk about when they want peace and quiet. A deeper kind. The kind where no one is observing, no one is evaluating, no one is keeping score. There is no external reference point telling you what is right or wrong in the moment. Just you. And that comes with something many people are not prepared for. Total responsibility. No one watching, no one judging, no one guiding, no invisible system correcting you or validating you. Every decision rests entirely on your own judgment, your own values, your own awareness. For some, that feels freeing. For others, it feels like standing in a wide open space with no walls and no map. There is nothing to lean on, nothing to answer to, nothing to reassure you that you are on the right path. And that can be more unsettling than the feeling of being observed. So the mind makes a quiet compromise. It holds on to a trace of that presence, not because it fully believes in it, but because letting go completely would mean facing a kind of freedom that feels heavier than control. So, the feeling is not random. It is not weakness, and it is not proof of anything supernatural either. It is a mix of childhood conditioning, brain wiring, emotional habit, and one powerful idea, repeated until it feels real. And once it is there, it does not leave easily. It settles in, quietly shaping how you think when no one is around. But here is something worth considering. If the feeling of being watched can be created, it can also be understood, and understanding changes your relationship with it. You stop reacting automatically. You start noticing it instead. Not as a presence outside you, but as a pattern inside you. And once you see the pattern clearly, it loses its authority. Not instantly, but steadily. And that changes more than you expect.